Today it's the third largest company in its field, has some absolutely superlative, unmatched programs that we're not going to take credit for those, but we think we did spark them and we have counseled them. And so we'd say that was a success.
Yeah, I think that calls for a drink, Pat.
Yes.
Turning to another side of you, you were president of Public Relations Society of America, and you had certain goals and certain philosophy. Could you review what you hoped to accomplish when you were president and what you feel you did accomplish and maybe what you have left undone for others to try to accomplish?
Well, what I wanted to do were a number of things. First of all, in those days, public relations was viewed as very much a technique, a skill, rather than as a counseling function. It was very much centered in New York City. In fact, within the society itself, the politics were that if you weren't from New York, you didn't exist. And of course, when I got elected to the board of directors, because of the way the districts were set up in those days, that meant nobody from New York could be elected to the board. So the cry went up immediately. And I wanted to, the issue became, I was known as a populist. I wanted all these little practitioners out here who worked for hospitals and schools and little companies. I wanted them. And not only that, I thought people from labor unions and activist groups who were professionals ought to be part of PRSA. Well, of course, the establishment thought that was a crazy idea, so I wanted to get that across. And I also looked at the structure of PRSA and realized that we could deliver a lot better member services if we could change the structure. And I was fortunate in having support from my predecessor and my board and from people around the country, because it's no secret that if you're talking about the rest of the world against New York City, the rest of the world is going to win in numbers, and that this populist view did come into practice. That's why PRSA now is twice as large almost as it was when I was president. But as a result of that, we were also able to reorganize the society, and I was lucky in being able to do a number of things. I had previously served on a task force that started the whole idea of sections in the society as another way to get member service. And so I was lucky to be able to set up during my year some of the key sections, like the public affairs section, for instance. I was also lucky in being able to make just a number of those structural and organizational changes. And my goal, my theme for the year was raising our sights. And I went around and I spoke to just about every chapter. And
I hear you traveled more than any previous PRSA
certainly
president.
Than any previous president.
Yep.
Because, you know, if you're going out and talking about, hey, how do you want the society? Do you out here in Little Rock want to be part of this, or do you want a few folks in a clique to run it? You got to get out there. But
what happens as we look at related disciplines? And for example, if we now looked at one of the relationships, which we used to call shareholder relations and financial public relations, and now we call investor relations. What I hear about that field is that more and more people with an MBA background are beginning to play a larger role, and the public relations role may be declining, or the public relations people in it have to learn more about the management side. But as that happens, do they then form a group and sort of spin out of the orbit of public relations?
No, I think professions, vocations, essentially arise out of a body of knowledge. And the body of knowledge for all these three arenas that I described is exactly the same body of knowledge. Also, by the way, the same body of knowledge human resources uses, and if you study the management literature, it's a very big piece of the management body of knowledge. And so I believe the problem, if we have one in, say, investor relations, and by the way, I noticed PRSA's section has now changed its name back to financial relations, because apparently the merchant banking, the other kinds of financial relations are as important today maybe as some of the investor relations. But in any event, I think our problem there is we may have people who think you do this with annual reports and you send out stockholder notices and get some publicity. That isn't going to work today. Of course, it's those relationships with the analysts, with the big pension fund people. Look at the California Employees Pension Fund and the clout that they're starting to have. And look at all of the studies. By the year 1996 or something like that, 70% of the stock in all American publicly held companies will be held by pension plans. You don't send them a piece of paper. You better know those people, and you better be able to answer their questions. And so I think what you're going to see, and I think you are seeing it, and one of our clients, for instance, just took a really seasoned public relations person who was broad, who talked the way we're talking here, and put him in charge of investor relations because they had some problems. Because he can go and sit with an analyst and say, hey, you want to beat up on us? Tell me what's wrong. Maybe I can take that message back to management. Let's get something going here. So I hope what we're going to see is more of this coming together than a falling apart. You know, groups go out and they always want to do their own thing, the issues managers and the public affairs people. But I'm sure you've noticed in your long career that they go out and they come back, and then they go out and they come back. It's mostly ego that drives them out. Hopefully we're past that.
Now, Pat, this may not be so bad. Going out and learning more about a related field, a related discipline, and then bringing that back into the core of activity.
Sure.
Now, if we follow that model, are there some new areas that you see our going out to where we could benefit largely? For example, another area where we've done that is in marketing. We call it, what, marketing communications?
Well, of course, I refuse to use that term.
Marketing, public relations?
Well, no, I don't use either of those terms because there's been this tremendous misunderstanding. Marketing was one of the fads of the 80s. You know, every company was going to solve all its problems by doing some marketing, whether they didn't even know what it meant. If you think of marketing, always remember, the marketing discipline grew out of the public relations discipline, not the other way around. The theory of publics, of segmenting publics, of learning about those publics and bringing that information back in so you could build a relationship, that was there long before there was a term even of marketing.
Don't you get a little angry sometimes when you feel that the concepts were ours, they started with us, but others are getting the credit for them?
Well,
like market segmentation?
Well,
you know, that's what everybody talks about.
Sure, but then on the other hand, that's just our own fault. It's this narrow thinking. Look at the great current fad, quality movement. You know, the quality movement is management 101. That's all it is. Talk to your people, communicate back and forth, build relationships, get a team going. Well, I mean, we should be doing that anyway. We talk about that. We've been talking about that for years. The management consultants put it together with a fancy name. They call it TQM or some other fancy name. And they're able to go in and sell that. Well, I look at that and I say, is that a failing on our part? Or, in fact, were we, again, the catalysts? Wasn't it our work originally that made marketing possible? And notice now that the marketers, having made their great claims and found they couldn't deliver, are now talking again about how we all work together and that, you know, public relations has to clear the path so marketing can occur. And the same thing, I think, goes on and on and on. One of our problems is that we have to be generalists. There is no human activity, certainly no professional or vocational activity, that has more variables in it than building relationships that engender trust, that motivate mutually supported behaviors. I mean, it's that wonderful story, you know, about the Frenchman who discovered that brain surgery was the most difficult profession. Why, he didn't know what he was talking about. As I say, every time the brain surgeon cuts into the cranium, the pieces are in the same place. Whereas, can you ever imagine a public relations case where the pieces are all in the same place, or where they're even in the same place between Monday and Friday? People change their minds, they change their patterns, and so we're going to be generous. The question really is, are we going to be willing to stop being against academics and theory And I think that's our present hang-up. You talk about theory to most public relations people and their eyes glaze over. And I always remember Kurt Lewin was right. There is nothing so practical as a sound theory.
This may be the problem. Maybe we're trying to develop what Talcott Parsons once called a general theory of action.
Exactly. A general theory of public relations. We don't have one.
Now, Pat.
Now, but wait, let me just pick up on that. I believe in my own personal work, picking up on our behavioral public relations model, is that in putting that model together, I began to realize that we lack in public relations today one of the absolute essentials of every profession, really of every vocation, and that is a process management system. Obviously, you're after outcomes, but you need a set process to get to the outcomes. If you look at law or accounting or engineering, when those people are given an opportunity or a problem, they don't kind of sit there and say, gosh, what should I do? They have a process. They do step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's the same every time. I think the next great step for us is to agree on some kind of a process management system that we can follow. It frees our minds then to use our creativity, and then maybe we'll be more accepting of theory and frameworks that will help.
How do you want to be thought of in the future? I don't want this to sound like an epitaph, but how do you want people to remember you?
Well, I would like to be remembered for having really pushed the profession to understand the high calling that this is. That, you know, if you want to really get philosophical about it, and I've written a piece on this which has been widely distributed around the world, but I believe it. The future of the world may very well be in the hands, if not of public relations practitioners, though I think it may be, but certainly in the hands of this public relations philosophy. Until we learn how to come together, make accommodations, co-author the behaviors, the world just seems to get a less and less safe place to be. And so I really believe that the future of mankind is more in our hands than anybody else. And when I look at the other professions that might help, I am only more convinced of that. Lord knows the lawyers aren't going to bail us out. Certainly the doctors aren't. They're too busy, you know, trying to just get health care going. Management, holy Moses. I mean, it's not very humanistic, still, at best. And certainly religions aren't. There's 108 religious wars going on right now. Who's left? Who's left is public relations practitioners that really have a value to the individual, a value to people, and want those people to come together and learn to work together. So I think that for anyone who's in this field or wants to come in this field, they can go all the way from being a very limited technician to being a universal leader of mankind using this wonderful body of knowledge.
Thank you, Pat. This is a good place to end, and maybe we should say for humankind to continue its endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.